Chair recognizes Representative Menendez.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, it is a true, many times we say this, but I want to tell you this is one of those times where we can take a great deal of honor for the privilege that we have, those of us who've been elected, sent here by the people of Texas to represent them, that we get to honor men and women, men who have today, the men who have fought to ensure our freedom, specifically those who sometimes you hear of them called as the greatest generation. Let there be no doubt, in my opinion, that they are the greatest generation. Members, I'm going to try to keep my comments short because we have a resolution. In this resolution, members, is a resolution. I want our heroes and their families to know that even though this resolution may have my name on it, it is a resolution of this entire body. It is way too much for one person to carry. In short, Texas was on the brink of war, was mainly an agrarian, both in employment and attitude, largely insulated from world events and still languishing in the 19th century traditions in such important matters as gender and ethnicity, and all that began to change on December the 7th, 1941. Whether it was wading ashore at Normandy, battling the sands of Iwo Jima, or flying the skies over Germany and South Pacific, these heroes were the ones that thought of when they said, "The land of the free and the home of the brave." Their selfless devotion serves as an inspiration to younger patriots who have continued to defend our rights and freedom. Tragically, more than 22,000 Texans gave their lives while in service during the war, and despite the horrific toll, the war brought lasting progress to the Lone Star State, and our thanks will never be enough, but we continue to show our gratitude for those who've served our nation. With that, members, I'd like to suspend all necessary rules to take up and consider House Resolution 1906, the most important one probably in my career.
Members, you've heard the motion. Is there any objection? Chair hears none. So ordered. Chair lays out the following resolution. The clerk will read the resolution.
H.R. 1906 by Menendez, honoring the veterans of World War II for their service to this country.
Chair asks Representative Menendez, Representative Sheffield, Representative Farias, and Representative Miller to read the resolution in full.
Chair recognizes Representative Menendez, Representative Sheffield, Representative Miller, and Representative Farias to read the resolution in full.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Whereas it has been said many times before, but it is true today as it ever has been. Freedom is not free. In times of war and in times of peace, the men and women of the United States Armed Forces have courageously faced great dangers and made tremendous sacrifices. And
whereas no generation persevered that the fact that the greatest generation, the generation that fought and won the Second World War, and
whereas, whether wading ashore at Normandy, battling on the sands of Iwo Jima, or flying in the skies over Germany and the South Pacific, these brave individuals looked aggression and evil in the eye and refused to blink. And
whereas the legacy of their courage and conviction lives on around the world, and they will continue to serve as an inspiration to younger patriots for their selfless devotion to the cause of liberty. And
whereas today we honor many of those who put their lives on the line to protect their fellow Americans. As always, we thank you for your service, your families for your service along with you, and we thank the Almighty for sending you to us in our hour of need. Now there be it resolved that the House of Representatives of the 83rd Texas Legislature hereby honor the veterans of World War II for their valiant service in this country's behalf. Members, I move adoption.
Members, you have heard this motion. Is there any objection? The resolution is unanimously adopted. All the members of the House move to add all members' name to the resolution. Is there any objection? Chair hears none, so ordered. Chair recognizes Representative Menendez.
Members, I have a list of those veterans who are in attendance with us today. And the very first veteran that I want to recognize is because I was asked to do this today by the governor's office, and I want to thank the governor's office and the governor for putting this together. And so I want to recognize a very special man in his life, in our life, and that's Mr. Ray Perry, a native of Haskell County who enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps in 1942. Mr. Perry flew 35 missions over war-torn Europe as a tail gunner on a B-17 and was honorably discharged at the end of the war, returning to Paint Creek where he married his sweetheart, Amelia, who is with him here today. And as you know, they are the proud parents of Mila and Rick Perry. And Mila, his daughter, is here with him as well. Please let's welcome Mr. Ray Perry and his family. Next, I'd like to recognize Mr. Jesse Farmer. He joined the Marines at age 17 with his mother's signature. He was stationed in Hawaii, Marshall Islands, and then fought in the 5th Wave at Iwo Jima. He was wounded during the attack. He had been given a tourniquet the morning of the attack by a medic that didn't have room for it. The tourniquet ended up saving his life when the artery in his arm was severed by shrapnel. He's joined today by his newlywed wife, Ms. Janice Murray. Please let us welcome Mr. Jesse Farmer and his wife, Ms. Janice Murray. Members, next we have Mr. Jack Purrier from Austin, Texas. He was a Navy reconnaissance photographer in the pre-invasion in the Pacific Theater. He's escorted today by Miss Ann Schneider. Please let us welcome Mr. Jack Purrier. Next veteran we'd like to recognize Mr. Wallace Lynn Lundgren, who was an Army Air Corps pilot who flew over 60 missions over Europe, and he's also escorted by Miss Ann Schreider today. Please let us welcome Mr. Wallace Lynn Lundgren. Next, we'd like to welcome Dr. John Jack Schneider, who was a Navy Medical Corps. Dr. Schneider, I believe you're right over here on my left. Let's welcome Dr. Schneider to his house. R.V. Bergen. R.V. Bergen served in the 1st Marine Division during the Pacific. He fought at Okinawa, New Britain Island. He was a platoon leader, mortarman, and he authored Islands of the Damned and was featured in the miniseries The Pacific. He's escorted by Mr. Stan Stephen. Let's welcome Mr. R.V. Bergen, please. Marvin Cantor served in the Navy as a gunner in the Pacific, Atlantic, and Okinawa during World War II, and he's escorted by Ms. Irene Cantor. Please let's welcome Mr. Marvin Cantor. Next, we'd like to welcome Mr. Gabriel Tamayo. Mr. Tamayo served as in the 1st Marine Division for the United States Marine Corps during World War II and Korea, and he's escorted today by his son. Let's please welcome Mr. Gabriel Tamayo and his son. Hazel Von Roeder. Hazel Von Roeder had her basic training at Fort Sam Houston. She was stationed at Fort Bliss, and she performed bedside nursing, administering medication and treatments. Today, she's escorted by Penny Von Roeder, Ritzky, daughter, and let's welcome Miss Hazel Von Roeder and her daughter, Penny. Joe Barger served in the Navy and was in the Battle of Iwo Jima and the invasion in Okinawa, and he's escorted today by Miss Tina Lee. Can we please welcome Mr. Joe Barger to his house? Alvino Mendoza. In October of 1944, Mr. Mendoza was a seaman for the Navy, and in late March of 1945, Mr. Mendoza was involved in the Battle of Okinawa. Today, we'd like to thank Mr. Mendoza and Mr. Alan Bergen for his escort today. Thank you, Mr. Mendoza, and let's welcome to his house. Norman Kosarek served in the United States Navy and the Pacific and served on an aircraft carriers, including the USS Wright, and he's escorted today by Miss Christy Newfield. Please, let's welcome Mr. Norman Kosarek. Ben Shedler served on a fleet tug in the South Pacific from 1942 to 1946. He was trained as a medical corpsman and on independent duty. After 90 days of training, he was prepared to do appendectomies, tonsillectomies, and sever limbs, and much more. Let's welcome Mr. Ben Shedler and his wife, Betty. I almost want to call him Doctor. I have this right here. Why don't you read this? Next gentleman is a constituent of our good friend Ruth. Go ahead.
Chair recognizes Representative McClendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dr. Granville Coggs, 1946. Dr. Coggs served in the United States Army Corps, earning military badges of aerial gunner and aerial bombardier, multi-engine pilot, and Tuskegee Airman.
DOTA Thomas Marvin Ellis. Mr. Ellis, I believe, is sitting here to my left. He was born in San Antonio, Texas, and following basic training at Camp Lee is also Representative McClendon's constituent. Virginia, Mr. Ellis was transferred to the Army Air Corps on completion of administrative clerk training program in October of 1942. Mr. Ellis was reassigned to Tuskegee Army Airfield as the only enlisted member in the orderly room administrative office of the newly activated 301st Fighter Squadron. He participated in the 331st Fighter Group transfer to Taranto, Italy, and he was awarded 7 battle stars before his discharge as Sergeant Major in September 1945. In talking to Sergeant Major Ellis, he also told me he had received an award from President Truman and President Bush. And let's welcome Sergeant Major Ellis. DOTA Warren Houston, native of San Antonio. His selection for advanced training after initial Army, Ms. McClendon's constituent as well. After initial assignment to Tuskegee Army Airfield sent him to Bryan, Texas, where he integrated the Base Instrument Command Flying School. After graduation, Mr. Houston returned to Tuskegee teaching instrument flying until his discharge in 1946. He's escorted today by Dr. Carolyn Sinkfield. Let's welcome Mr. Houston. DOTA Claude R. Platt, Jr. was born in Denison, Texas. He was sent to Tuskegee Institute in 1938. He became a part of the Tuskegee experiment. Platt was among the group that wasn't washed out of the program. He became a flight instructor and trained over 300 Tuskegee airmen to fly when the Army and the Air Force became 2 separate units. Platt became the first black pilot in the United States Air Force trained. And he is escorted today by his lovely wife, Irma Bonner Platt, and Inez Clark. Let's welcome Mr. Platt and his family. Members, last but not least on the list of war heroes that I have in front of me is Staff Sergeant Homer Hogues. Born in Navasota, Texas, was drafted and sent to Shepherd Air Force Base for basic training. He was then sent to Japan for cleanup duties, and upon advice from a fellow airman, his orders were changed, and he was assigned to the Tuskegee Group. At Shante Field, Illinois, Hogues gained special training on the P-47 Thunderbolt aircraft. Tuskegee Airman experience began at Lockbourne Air Force Base in Columbus, Ohio. In Ohio, Hogues was assigned to the famous 99th Fighter Squadron, 332nd Fighter Group, and I quote, Texas, as he was called by his fellow airmen, was proud to be a mechanic on airplanes with pilots such as Chappie James, who helped win World War II. He's escorted by Maddie Hogues, his lovely wife, and Barbara Hogues, his daughter. Let us welcome Staff Sergeant Hogues. Members, if there is anyone either on the floor or in the gallery who served this country, your service, while we honor today our World War II vets, I believe that the men and women who serve, we'd all like to thank you all for your service. Would you please rise so we can all thank all the men and women who served? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members, for your attention. In the 12 years, it's probably one of the most fulfilling things that I've had an opportunity to do. Thank you for this opportunity.